If adaptive thinking is so simple, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, before we step into the practice of adaptive thinking, we need to talk about some of the limitations and possibilities of the human brain. Why? Because you are human, of course, and there are some things you can't change about yourself. Being aware of your limitations and possibilities is an important part of building any skill, let alone novel and adaptive thinking. Let's start with the notion of bounded rationality. Thought to be coined by Herbert Simon, bounded rationality is the idea that, in decision-making, human beings are bound by the amount of information at hand, their cognitive limitations, or what their brain can imagine in terms of solutions, and the amount of time they have to make a decision. In this sense, human beings automatically default to seeking a satisfactory rather than an optimal solution. Or they go for one answer and not the answer. Yes, they practice convergent thinking. In a similar vein is cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is a mistake in thinking, reasoning, decision-making, and rationalizing that causes humans to automatically favor their beliefs and their preferences, regardless of what information is being presented to the contrary. Cognitive bias is a natural phenomenon. We all suffer from it. Buster Benson, one of the world's most unique thinkers, took on the task of collecting all the information on Wikipedia that concerned itself with cognitive bias. He used visual sense-making to create a model that organizes and visualizes this in a meaningful way. It's awesome, but way too detailed for our lesson. Instead, we present his cognitive bias cheat sheet as an explanation for the fundamental forces behind cognitive bias. What you see here are 4 conundrums, each with several influences on our biases. In the first, there is just too much information in the world, and we have no choice but to filter almost all of it out. Our brain uses a few simple tricks to pick out the bits of information that are most likely going to be useful in some way. We notice things that are already primed in our memory, or repeated often. Bizarre, funny, visually striking things stick out more than non-bizarre, unfunny things. We notice when something has changed, and we are drawn to details that confirm our own existing beliefs. In the second, the world is very confusing, and we end up only seeing a tiny sliver of it, but we need to make some sense of it in order to survive. Once the reduced stream of information comes in, we connect the dots, fill in the gaps with stuff we already think we know, and update our mental models of the world. We find stories and patterns, even in sparse data. We fill in characteristics from stereotypes, generalities, and prior histories whenever there are new specific instances or gaps in information. We imagine things in people we're familiar with or fond of as better than things in people we aren't familiar with or fond of. We simplify probabilities and numbers to make them easier to think about. We think we know what others are thinking. We project our current mindset and assumptions onto the past and future. In the third, we're constrained by time and information, and yet we can't let that paralyze us. With every piece of new information, we need to do our best to assess our ability to affect the situation, apply it to decisions, simulate the future to predict what might happen next, and otherwise act on our new insight. In order to act, we need to be confident in our ability to make an impact and to feel like what we do is important. In order to stay focused, we favor the immediate, relatable thing in front of us over the delayed and distant. In order to get anything done, we're motivated to complete things that we've already invested time and energy in. In order to avoid mistakes, we're motivated to preserve our autonomy and status in a group and to avoid irreversible decisions. We favor options that appear simple or that have more complete information over more complex, ambiguous options. And in the fourth, there's too much information in the universe. We can only afford to keep around the bits that are most likely to prove useful in the future. We need to make constant bets and trade-offs around what we try to remember and what we forget. For example, we prefer generalizations over specifics because they take up less space. When there are lots of irreducible details, we pick out a few standout items to save and discard the rest. What we save is most likely to inform our filters related to problem 1's information overload, as well as to inform what comes to mind during the processes mentioned in problem 2 around filling in incomplete information. It's all self-reinforcing. We edit and reinforce some memories after the fact. We discard specifics to form generalities. We reduce events and lists to their key elements. We store memories differently based on how they were experienced. Moving on, we have hyperbolic discounting. Sounds complex, doesn't it? Well, it's not, and it's something we all do at some point or another. Hyperbolic discounting is a cornerstone of behavioral economics. It is the premise that people will make a decision based on a time-based relationship with the reward. Basically, how soon will they receive the reward? So instead of going for the optimal solution, they go towards the one that delivers the reward faster. If you think about it, you can imagine that in many organizations, quick results are a driver. If you're going to apply adaptive thinking to problems, tasks, or decisions, you need to be wary of the pressure to select the option that delivers the quickest results. And there is a balance. In studies, people were asked questions like, if I offer you $10 today, but $20 tomorrow, would you wait until tomorrow? Most people will wait. But if I ask this question, if I offer you $10 today, but $30 in 6 months, would you wait 6 months? Not so much. So when considering the optimal solution, you need to take into consideration the length of time people and organizations will wait for the results. And finally, constructive uncertainty. A great way to start the journey towards adaptive thinking is to manage the issue of your own bias. You can't change it, but what you can do is limit its gravity on your thinking approach. Howard Ross has developed a fantastic method called constructive uncertainty. It means to create uncertainty by seeking more information on the subject. He figures the more you know, the less you might be confident of your own view on the subject. An important point here is that in a way, it counters Watchdog's definition of in the moment and the requirement to make decisions under time pressure. Constructive uncertainty requires you to slow down, as research confirms that time dilutes the gravity of bias. Instead of considering constructive uncertainty as an enabler to adaptive thinking, see it as a means to practice adaptive thinking, so that over time, you are capable of using it under pressure. Okay, so you know the context in which adaptive thinking is used, the traits of adaptive thinkers, capped with what you must realize about yourself in order to move your thinking on a spectrum from mechanical to divergent. Let's take a step-by-step approach and see how it's done so you can begin utilizing this skill. Be aware of the impact bounded rationality and cognitive bias automatically have on your thinking. Resist the temptation to think mechanically. Try to consider more than one solution to start with. Then avoid hyperbolic discounting by determining if you are reaching an optimal solution or the one that rewards you the soonest. Information flooding. Take the plunge and use constructive uncertainty as a means of reducing the gravity of bias. Seek the opinions of others. Make dissent a systematic part of your process. Or ensure you have people to counter your perspective. In this way, you will avoid cognitive dissonance, which is hanging out with people and in places where your views aren't challenged, but supported. Creating an environment free from rigidity and with permission to explore and make mistakes mimics the play of childhood. This environment is proven by researchers to promote adaptive thinking. Don't be afraid to rethink the problem or challenge you're trying to solve. Adaptive thinking is about questioning the question as much as it is about finding the optimal solution. One last thing. If you are on a particularly challenging problem or task, get proper sleep. Research has confirmed what we probably already knew. Sleep deprivation limits your ability to think divergently. As a way of illustrating this approach, let's recall the challenge your manager set for you. There is poor communication impacting team effectiveness. Can you please look into this and find a solution? So what does fixing a communication problem with the team look like using adaptive thinking? 1. Be aware of cognitive bias and look to understand the limits of your knowledge on a topic of communication prior to moving forward. 2. Be open to considering more than one solution. In fact, require it. But don't automatically opt for the one that seems to be the easiest or quickest to implement, unless justified. 3. Deep dive into the topic. Brute search. Read, talk, listen, watch, etc. And learn everything within your constraints there is to know about communication in teams and to minimize what you think the solution already is. 4. Infuse dissent. Get the opinions of others, particularly those you know generally disagree with you, to help validate or invalidate your findings. 5. Create an objective environment free from rigidity, open to questioning, discovery, multiple angles and solutions, and debate. 6. Do what a machine can't. Question the question. Is it really communication that is the problem? Could it be the tools, our processes, or the people? 7. Make sure you get enough sleep. A rested mind works better every time.